A woman's voice trembles over the phone. "There is a suspicious man outside my house. I do not feel safe." The 911 dispatcher listens carefully. What is he doing? She grips the curtain tightly, peeking through. He is just standing there, looking at his phone. The dispatcher pauses. "Ma'am, is he acting aggressively?" "No, but he should not be here. Police are on their way. But in just a few minutes, everything will change, so fast, so dramatically that even she will be left speechless. What happens next will make her regret the call. Who is this man? And why will this one moment change everything? Before we continue, let us know. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Linda Thompson grips her phone, her breathing uneven. She tells herself she did the right thing. She is not overreacting. It is about safety. That is what everyone says, right? She moves the curtain just enough to peek outside again. The man is still there. Tall, well-dressed, focused on his phone. He's not knocking on doors, not pacing nervously, not looking around like someone up to no good. But something about him makes her uneasy. This is a quiet, upscale neighborhood where unfamiliar faces stand out. People live here for the security, the sense of community, the unspoken understanding that certain things do not happen here. Linda tells herself that if this man had a reason to be here, she would know. The neighbors would know. But no one else seems to have noticed him. The sirens grow louder. Relief washes over her. The police will handle it. But something lingers in the back of her mind, an itch she cannot quite scratch. There is something familiar about him. A shadow of a memory just out of reach. She shakes off the thought. Maybe she is imagining things. Maybe this is just paranoia, like her husband always says. But then why can't she shake the feeling that this moment will change everything? The sirens grow louder, the wailing sound cutting through the silence of the street. Linda steps away from the window, her heart pounding harder than she expected. Why does she feel so nervous? She is the one who called them. She swallows hard, her mouth suddenly dry. Maybe it is because the situation is real now. The police are here. No turning back. A squad car rolls to a slow stop in front of her house. 2 officers step out. The first is older, built like a linebacker. His eyes scanning the area as if he has done this 1,000 times before. The second is younger, slimmer, still getting used to the weight of his badge. They move with purpose, but not urgency. This is routine for them. The man on the sidewalk looks up, confused. He glances around like he is making sure they are actually talking to him. "Me?" "Yes, you. Hands where we can see them." Linda holds her breath. The moment feels heavier than she thought it would. The man lets out a slow breath, lifting his hands slightly. Not all the way up, just enough to show he has nothing in them. What's going on? "Someone called about a suspicious person in the area," the older officer says. His voice is calm, but firm. The man blinks. "Suspicious? I'm just standing here." Linda stiffens. Why does he sound so defensive? "Do you live around here?" the younger officer asks. The man studies their faces for a second. Then slowly, he shakes his head. "Number, but I have a reason to be here." "ID, please," the older officer says. The man reaches into his pocket. Immediately, both officers stiffen, their hands moving slightly toward their holsters. "Slowly," the older one warns. A look flashes across the man's face, one Linda cannot quite read. Frustration? Resignation? He pulls out his wallet, careful, deliberate, like he has done this before. Linda watches, gripping her phone. Why does this feel so intense? He is just showing his ID. The officer takes it, his eyes flicking over the name, the address. His expression does not change, but something in his stance does. A split-second shift. "Where are you headed?" The man exhales through his nose. I am waiting for someone. Who? Someone who lives in this neighborhood. Who? The officer presses again. The man licks his lips. I would rather not say until they get here. Linda feels her breath hitch. Why is he being so secretive? The older officer narrows his eyes. Sir, we need full cooperation. The man stares at him, jaw tight. I am cooperating. I am standing here. I gave you my ID. I am answering your questions. Then tell us who you are meeting. A long pause. The man shakes his head. It is personal. Linda's stomach twists. What does that mean? The younger officer shifts uncomfortably. He looks at his partner, waiting for the next move. The older officer sighs. All right. We are going to need to check a few things. He steps away, speaking into his radio. The man stares ahead, lips pressed together. He looks tired. Linda frowns. Tired of what? Then, suddenly, the man looks directly at her house, right at her window. Her heart jumps. He knows. But how? Her mind races. Does he see me? Does he know I called? The younger officer follows his gaze, then looks back at the man. You okay? The man does not answer right away. He just shakes his head slightly, almost to himself. Yeah, I am fine. But something in his voice says otherwise. And then, something Linda never expected happens. The older officer, still holding the ID, suddenly stops talking into his radio. His entire body stiffens. His face changes, not in an obvious way, but just enough for Linda to notice. He glances back at the ID, then back at the man. Something is wrong. The younger officer notices too. What is it? The older officer does not answer immediately. He looks at the ID one more time. Then slowly, he lifts his eyes to the man in front of him. Wait a second, he says, voice quieter now. Linda leans forward. What? What is happening? The man tilts his head slightly, watching the officer carefully. You said you don't live here, the officer says. I don't, the man replies. But you know someone who does? A pause, then a slow nod. Yes. The officer swallows. A flicker of something crosses his face. Disbelief, recognition. Then finally, he asks the question that changes everything. Sir, is your name Marcus? The man's expression is unreadable. He stares at the officer for a long moment before speaking. Yes. Linda grips the windowsill, something twisting in her gut. Marcus. Why does that name feel familiar? Then, in an instant, it hits her, hard, like a punch to the chest. Her mouth goes dry. She knows who he is. She knows exactly who he is. And suddenly, she feels sick. Linda's hands are ice cold as she grips the windowsill. Her heart pounds against her ribs, louder than the sirens that had only just faded. She stares at the man outside, at the officers, at the shift in the air that feels almost suffocating. Marcus. The name swirls in her head like a distant echo, but it is not distant at all. It is from her past. It is from here. A name she has not thought about in years, and yet now it is standing in the middle of her perfect neighborhood, face to face with the police. The older officer clears his throat, his demeanor shifting. You're Marcus? He glances at the ID again, then back at the man in front of him. Yeah, Marcus replies, voice steady but distant. Linda's stomach tightens. She knows that voice. She knows it because she heard it once before, when it was younger, softer, full of laughter, full of trust. The younger officer watches his partner, confused. Wait, you know him? The older officer nods slowly, exhaling through his nose. His entire posture relaxes, but his eyes stay locked on Marcus. Yeah, I do. Marcus tilts his head slightly, waiting for whatever comes next. The younger officer frowns. Then why is he here? Linda already knows the answer. And suddenly, she wishes more than anything that she could disappear. The older officer finally looks up, toward the house, toward her house. His gaze lingers for just a moment before turning back to Marcus. "You're here to see Linda, aren't you?" The silence that follows is unbearable. Marcus nods once, slow, controlled. "Yeah." A ringing fills Linda's ears. The room feels smaller, suffocating. She wants to close the curtain, pretend this never happened, but it is too late. The younger officer exhales. "Okay, so, hold on. Why was he reported as suspicious?" Marcus laughs, but there is no humor in it. "Yeah, that's a great question." His words slice through the air like a blade. Linda feels her pulse quicken. The older officer shakes his head and looks toward the house again. Linda called. For the first time since this all started, Marcus's face changes. He does not look surprised. He does not look confused. He looks disappointed. And somehow that is worse. Linda's breath comes short and fast. She feels like a trapped animal. She did not think. She just reacted. And now there is no way out of this moment. Marcus nods slowly, looking down for a second, then back at the officers. "I grew up in this house," he says, his voice calm, even. "Linda used to babysit me when I was a kid." The younger officer looks between them, processing this new information. "Wait, what?" The words hit Linda like a slap. She feels exposed. She wishes she could say something, anything, but what could she say? Marcus shakes his head. "Yeah, I was just standing here, checking my phone, and she called the cops on me." The weight of his words settles heavily in the air. Linda's fingers dig into the windowsill, but she cannot move. The older officer rubs his face, suddenly exhausted. "All right. Look. Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus's eyes flick to him. "A misunderstanding?" He lets out another breathless laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure, a misunderstanding." Linda's throat feels tight. It is impossible to ignore what has happened. Impossible to pretend like she did not just make the worst mistake of her life. The younger officer shifts uncomfortably. "So, what do we do now?" The older officer exhales. "We leave." He looks at Marcus. "You're free to go, obviously." Marcus nods, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, of course I am." He does not move right away. He looks at the house one last time, his gaze passing over the curtains that Linda is hiding behind. Then, finally, he turns and walks away. The officers exchange glances before heading back to their car. The younger one looks back at Linda's house, almost like he is trying to imagine what kind of person would make this call. Then they drive off, leaving nothing but silence. Linda still cannot move. The realization of what she has done sits like a weight on her chest. This is not just an awkward misunderstanding. This is not something that will fade away with time. This is something else. She called the police on someone she once cared for, someone who trusted her, and she does not know if she will ever be able to live with that. Linda stands frozen by the window, her breath shallow. The quiet in the house is unbearable, pressing against her like a weight she cannot escape. Marcus is gone. The police are gone. But the damage is done. She can still hear his voice in her head. "Linda used to babysit me when I was a kid." Her knees feel weak. She grips the back of a chair, steadying herself. How had she not recognized him? How had she not even considered the possibility? He had been part of her life, part of her childhood, and yet, the moment she saw him standing outside, she had not seen Marcus. She'd only seen a stranger. A threat. She forces herself to sit down, but her mind will not slow down. Memories crash over her like waves, bits and pieces of the past resurfacing. She remembers summer afternoons when her mother asked her to watch Marcus while his mom ran errands. He had been younger than her, always full of energy, running through their backyard, laughing as she chased him. He used to look up to her, trust her. And now, That little boy had grown into a man she had feared, a man she had called the police on without even thinking. Her stomach turns. She reaches for her phone, her fingers hovering over it. She could call him, apologize. But then what? What could she possibly say that would make this better? She stands up abruptly, pacing the room. Maybe she is overthinking this. Maybe Marcus will understand. After all, she had just been concerned for her safety, right? That is what people always say, better safe than sorry. But the moment she thinks it, her chest tightens. She had not been in danger. Marcus had not done anything. He had been standing there, looking at his phone, and that had been enough for her to assume the worst, enough for her to call the cops, bringing armed officers into a situation that never should have involved them. She turns back to the window, her eyes darting to the street where Marcus had stood. It looks the same, perfectly normal. But she knows everything has changed. Then something else hits her, hard. If Marcus had not been Marcus, if he had been someone the officers didn't recognize, if things had played out differently, what could have happened? Her throat goes dry. It had taken one look, one assumption. And what if he had not been so calm? What if he had gotten frustrated, raised his voice, moved too fast? What if the officers had misread his intentions? Her chest tightens. She sits back down, gripping the edge of the table. This is not just a personal mistake. This is something bigger. And the worst part? She had not even realized it until now. She swallows hard, a deep shame settling into her bones. This was not just about Marcus. It was about her, about the way she saw the world, about the quiet, unspoken biases she never even questioned. She had thought she was a good person, the kind who would never judge someone unfairly. And yet, the moment she saw Marcus, someone she had once known, someone she had loved like a little brother, she had not recognized him. Not because he looked different, but because her mind had been conditioned to see him as a threat before she saw him as a person. Her breath shakes. She had thought she was better than this. She presses her hands to her face, squeezing her eyes shut. She wants to undo it, wants to take back the call, take back the fear, take back the way she had looked at him, and immediately assumed the worst. But she cannot. All she can do is face the truth. And the truth is, she had not called the cops because she was in danger. She had called the cops because she had been afraid of her own assumptions. And now she has to live with that. Linda stares at her reflection in the darkened window, but she barely recognizes herself. The weight of what she has done lingers in the silence. The realization is suffocating. She had not just misjudged Marcus. She had exposed a part of herself she never wanted to see. She always thought of herself as a good person, fair, reasonable, someone who did not judge people unfairly. But tonight shattered that illusion. She had seen Marcus, and without a second thought, she had assumed the worst. She had called the police, fully believing she was doing the right thing. But she had not been protecting herself. She had been protecting her own ignorance. Her fingers tighten around the edge of the table. She wants to make this right. But how? An apology? What would that even mean? Sorry, I saw you as a threat. Sorry, I forgot who you were. Sorry, I almost ruined your life because of my own bias. She shakes her head. Words feel useless. Her phone sits on the table, silent. She picks it up, scrolling through old contacts, but Marcus's number is not there. Of course, it is not. They had not spoken in years. She had not thought about him, and now she cannot think about anything else. She opens her neighborhood group chat where people post about lost pets and trash pickup schedules. The same people she knew would have agreed with her earlier, nodding and saying she had done the right thing by calling. The same people who, if this had gone differently, would have had a very different kind of conversation. One full of justifications and excuses. She wonders if they would have cared if Marcus had been taken away in handcuffs, if they would have questioned anything at all. Her stomach twists. The truth is, she cannot fix what happened tonight. She cannot undo the moment she made that call. She cannot take away the way Marcus looked at her when he realized it was her. The disappointment in his eyes will haunt her forever. She stands up and starts pacing, the air in the room suddenly too thick. She wants to blame something else, fear, the media, the way people talk about safety, but she knows deep down that this was not about any of that. This was about her own assumptions, the way she'd let herself believe that someone like Marcus did not belong here, even though he had spent his childhood playing in this very yard. She thinks back to those summers. Marcus had been younger, always full of energy, always running ahead while she chased after him. She had protected him, made sure he did not fall, made sure he drank enough water, made sure he got home safe. And now she had called the police on him. She forces herself to sit back down. The problem is, this is not just about one mistake. It is about how easy it was to make that mistake, how natural it had felt to assume the worst. And it scares her. Because if she had not recognized Marcus, if the officers had not recognized Marcus, how would this have ended? She pictures him in handcuffs, pushed against a police car, arrested for nothing. Her breath catches. She had always thought these kinds of things happened to other people, in other places. But tonight, it was her. She had been the one to call. And that realization settles into her bones, heavy and unshakable. She glances back at her phone. Maybe she should text someone. Her sister, her friend, just to say something, to hear another voice, to get reassurance that she is not a terrible person. But she does not, because she knows what they will say. You didn't mean any harm. You were just being cautious. It's not your fault. But it is her fault. And that is the hardest part to accept. She exhales shakily, running a hand through her hair. The question is not whether she can change. It is whether she will. She thinks about Marcus. What would he even say to her if she tried to reach out? Would he even want to hear from her? Would it just make things worse? For the first time, she understands that this is not just about seeing the problem. It is about doing something about it. Because if she does nothing, if she just moves on like this never happened, then she is no different from the people who pretend these things do not matter. And that is not who she wants to be. Maybe this is the beginning. Maybe, for the first time, she is finally ready to listen. Linda sits in the same chair, staring at the same window, but everything feels different now. The street outside is quiet again. No sirens, no flashing lights, no officers, just the same neighborhood she has lived in for years. But now, she sees it differently. She used to think she knew this place. She used to believe she was the kind of person who would never judge unfairly. But tonight, she learned something about herself she can never unlearn. Marcus is gone, but his presence lingers in her mind. That look in his eyes, the disappointment, the quiet understanding of exactly what had happened, haunts her. He did not yell. He did not argue. He did not need to. His silence had been enough. She thought calling the police was the responsible thing to do. But now she realizes the truth. She had not been protecting herself. She had been protecting her own fear. And tonight, that fear nearly cost someone their dignity, their peace, maybe even their safety. She wonders if Marcus will ever forgive her. Maybe, maybe not. But that is not the point. The point is, she needs to change. Not just for herself, but for the people around her. Because if she does not, then nothing changes at all. Have you ever made an assumption about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about this. Let's listen. And most importantly, let's learn.